You thought you had issues?
You've been shot at in a train wreck?
I love my country.
Wait until you hear this.
I required that as a requirement.
1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Yeah.
She calls you a liar.
I can't lie about facts.
Tom Jordan?
Great to be with you, Tom.
You don't strike me as someone who's clutching your pearls.
Major issues there.
I don't have pearls.
Tom Jordan's Got Issues.
Oh, do I ever. And so do you. My issue right now has to do with what we are learning are the long-term effects of quarantine, of isolation. What happens to a person when that person is ordered to stay in relative seclusion for a lengthening duration of time? And which remedies are authorized or deemed essential to help cope with such lockdown orders? All right, first the effects. Listen to this infectious disease specialist and psychiatrist with what she told the nation's governors.
The research literature is clear on the effects of quarantine and stay-at-home practices on mental health. We know that the longer the duration of these orders, the greater the intensity of the mental health problems experienced. We also know that these symptoms persist for years to come, even once quarantine is lifted. The data tell us that when the lives of adults, children, and families are drastically changed for extended lengths of time, for many, anxiety, depression, and stress disorders will become manifest and will persist.
All right, that's Dr. Eleanor McCants-Katz, a psychiatrist with Health and Human Services for Mental Health and Substance Abuse. This is the knowledge which we know the governors are aware, even as lockdown orders persist and are in many cases extended. We are, generally speaking, still in lockdown mode in much of the country. And now, months later, the data is showing a pretty ugly picture of its effect. Here it is. Suicide calls are up 600% in the United States. 600%. One doctor in California says there is a year's worth of suicide attempts in just a 4-week period. A year in 4 weeks. A year in 1 month. The data is showing we need corrective measures. We need help. People need healing and they need hope. And soon, just look over in Australia right now. They are preparing for a 50% increase in suicides for the next 5 years because of this. In Michigan, to help people cope with all this anxiety from lost jobs, lost wages, isolation, loneliness, the governor has designated liquor stores and marijuana dispensaries as essential businesses. Liquor stores and marijuana dispensaries have been deemed essential. Churches, synagogues, other places of worship? No. Even though, at least in this country, freedom of religion is a staple of human rights, some people say they can trace this foundational principle all the way to the beginning of time. It is inherent in our makeup of humankind. It is essential. In the United States of America, the freedom of religion is a constitutionally protected right because it is largely acknowledged that belief in God is something that is deeply embedded in the individual conscience. You have the right to believe and you have the right to not believe. The government cannot take away or compel you, forcibly mandate, to either believe or to not believe in a particular religion. It's hands off. Separation of church and state. And by the way, that separation was something Thomas Jefferson agreed to in a letter when a group of pastors asked him to acknowledge that the government cannot interfere with the practice of religion. Presidents since the founding of this country to the current day president have protected that right, some more than others. But what about during a pandemic? When a government can distinguish between what is allowed and what is not allowed in times of a highly contagious viral outbreak, we do need food, so grocery stores are essential. They can stay open, along with gas stations. But a lumpectomy to remove a cancerous tumor that has metastasized in the lymph nodes, that's not essential, apparently. Canceled until further notice. That's happening. Mammograms canceled for high-risk patients, heart disease treatments delayed, etc. All this while more than 30 million people have lost their jobs because of government closures of non-essential businesses. We are in the middle of a pandemic, yes, and it is severe. Lives are at stake. But there's also been a lot of grief over the last few months. Anxiety is up. Again, calls to suicide hotlines are up 600%. Churches, synagogues, mosques, they have not been deemed essential until now.
Today I'm identifying houses of worship, churches, synagogue, and mosques as essential places that provide essential services.
CBS News there with that broadcast of President Trump's recent statement. There's a lot of support of this, and there's a lot of pushback as well.
Does the White House now support these churches that are defying governor's orders and opening up?
The president doesn't have this authority. This is a political act by the president to appeal to his base.
Look, the bottom line is this. The president should not be the one to tell people to go to houses of worship, where, of course, big groups can congregate.
Okay, that's Bloomberg, that's CNN. The CDC guidelines are something churches, synagogues, mosques, and other houses of worship are reviewing closely and implementing into their reopening phases. Many religious leaders have been waiting for this, as they've been planning for this up until this announcement just last week. Why? Well, because they usually, and it's certainly the case in this pandemic, have a front row seat to the myriad of grievous circumstances that have arisen in people's lives during this crisis, and believe they can help in ways that online streaming just cannot. In this edition, I'll have two enlightening discussions with some who believe religion is an essential ingredient. One with Brooks Gibbs. He is an author, he's a speaker, he's an educator, and a school psychologist who teaches teenagers and parents how to be resilient even in times of crises. I'll also speak with Tim Christoson. He's a pastor, he's an author who is carefully reopening his church this weekend. If you'd like to hear the interview with my guests, click on the link for the podcast for this edition of Tom Jordan's Got Issues. I'm Tom Jordan, and I got issues.